Good evening, everyone. Hi, I'm McKenna from Murder by the Book in Houston, Texas. I am very excited tonight to be joined by one of my favorite longtime authors who he always visits the store, so we're at least happy to be able to talk with him virtually tonight. We'll be talking with Mark Greaney about his newest Gray Man book, Relentless. A lot of you, obviously, if you're tuning in, are familiar with this series, but in a few minutes, I'll bring him back on here and get him introduced, and we'll have a nice conversation about his books. A few things before we do that, as those of you who are watching continue to join. So we've got a few authors coming up that I think might be of interest if you like the Gray Man books. We will be talking with Steve Berry next week for his new Cotton Malone thriller. I believe that's February 24th. We'll also be back the first week of March with CJ Box, and we'll have signed copies of his new Joe Pickett book. We're also speaking with Don Bentley and Nick Petrie on March 5th. So again, good thriller audience. And then we're really excited about kind of a fun, different event. We'll be hosting Harlan Coben in conversation with Michael J. Fox on March 18th. These are just some highlights. We have authors almost every night of the week now through these virtual events. So make sure to check out murderbooks.com for our full schedule. We also have been posting on social media about the Texas electrical outages and storm and how we've been closed this week, but we are now open. We have internet and power, and we can help you safely if you want to come in and buy books. And we actually were able to get our two of the three Murder by the Box subscriptions out the door today. So if you subscribe and you get Cozy Corner or Crime Fiction Legends, they have been picked up and will be headed to you shortly. And for more information about that, if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you can visit murderbythebox.com. Before I bring Mark on, if you have any questions and you're watching on YouTube, feel free to pop those in the live chat. And if you are watching on Facebook, you can just put them in the comments. I'm going to go ahead and drop a link for more information about this title. We do have signed book plates available if you wanted to order the book from us. And like I said, you can find out information about that at murderbooks.com. So I think that it is time to bring Mark on. Good evening, Mark.
Hey, McKenna. How you doing?
I'm good. Good to see you in our cold, snowy weather.
Both of us, yeah.
So like I said, if you're unfamiliar with Mark Greaney, I'm going to go ahead and get him introduced. So Mark Greaney has a degree in international relations and political science. In his research for the Gray Man novels, he traveled to more than 15 countries and trained alongside military and law enforcement in the use of firearms, battlefield medicine, and close-range combative tactics. With Marine LtCol Rip Rawlings, he co-wrote the New York Times bestseller Red Metal. He's also the author of many New York Times bestselling Tom Clancy novels. He's with us tonight, as I said, to discuss Relentless, which is the 10th Gray Man novel. I cannot believe we are at number 10 already, but it's fantastic. All right, so let's get started. Why don't you tell us, just quick elevator pitch, what's happening in this book?
Sure. Yeah, so the entire series, first I have to stress that every book is a standalone novel. You don't have to read the entire series. I'd love for you to. McKenna would love for you to eventually, but you can pick up any book and read them in any order. You pick up Relentless and you are thrown right into the action, and you learn on the run who's who and what's what. But the entire series is about a guy whose name is Cortland Gentry. And he's a former CIA paramilitary operations officer. And then as the series has progressed, his role has kind of changed. He was on the run from the CIA for several years. And at that point, he worked kind of as a freelance assassin, but he's a guy with a moral compass and a strong moral beliefs. And he kind of only did things he thought were righteous at the time. Now he's kind of back with the CIA in an unofficial contract capacity. And this book actually opens up with him in a hospital bed. He's been wounded, something that happened in a previous book. And against the doctor's advice, the deputy director of operations of the CIA comes in and basically yanks him out of the bed and throws him back into the field. So the elevator pitch of this book is Court has to, along with some colleagues, has to unravel an international conspiracy that could lead the United States into a war.
Excellent. So one of the things that's mentioned in your bio is that you've traveled so much for these books. So this one is Venezuela, Berlin. Obviously, we're in a pandemic. So did you get to visit those places, or how did you get your research on those?
I was really, really lucky. This was only the second time that I wasn't able to travel for a Gray Man novel to do location research. The first one was Gunmetal Gray. I was going to Vietnam. It was all planned. And then I had to have ankle surgery, so that I just wrote that book from my couch. This book, I'd already planned on making Berlin as one of the main. I've spent a lot of time in Latin America. I've never been to Venezuela, but I've spent a ton of time in Latin America. And Berlin was the setting that I wanted to write about. And fortunately for me, I had no idea there was going to be a pandemic. Originally, my plan was I was going to rent an apartment in Berlin for 4 or 6 weeks and really immerse myself there. But I used to live in Germany. I lived in Cologne, and I've been to Berlin probably 10 times in my life. I researched a Tom Clancy novel there, Command Authority. And I was just in Germany a couple of years ago with Rip Rawlings, researching red metal. So I know Germany really well. I know Berlin really well. So I got really lucky. If the book took place in Tokyo or something like that, someplace I haven't been to yet, I would have been in trouble. So I basically just fell back on, my knowledge of the city, my knowledge of Germany, and research, and just took it from there.
Well, I mean, you wouldn't know that you didn't get to go this time. It totally works. So as I mentioned, and yes, you can read them in any order or pick one up here or there, but you have been writing about Court for 10 books.
Yeah.
Has he changed? Has the character changed in any ways that originally you might not have suspected when you first started writing The Gray Man?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, when I first started writing The Gray Man, I didn't think of a series or anything. I was just trying to be a published author. So once The Gray Man was acquired and it did pretty well, they asked me to continue the series. So I really didn't think beyond book one as I wrote book one. But he has changed a lot. So just as I said, every book is a complete standalone. If you read the entire series, there is a larger story arc that happens as well. You don't miss out if you don't know all the ins and outs of everybody's history. But if you do read the entire series, you will pick up on that. As I said at the beginning, he has had different roles as the series has gone on. He's been a lone, kind of a lone operator, a singleton at certain points, and then he's worked on a team on certain points. You see his relationship with some of the main characters, specifically a woman named Zoya Zakharova, who's a Russian former SVR, which is their Foreign Intelligence Service operative. And she, just like Court, was burned by the agency that she worked for. So she's now been flipped and works for the CIA in the same program that Court does, is a unit called Poison Apple, which is a kind of a sub-Rosa group in the CIA. So Court and Zoya have a relationship. He's in love with her, not so sure what she thinks of him. I spent a lot of time developing these characters, obviously, and a lot of that just involves thinking about, well, what would it be like if you shot people for a living, or had to go through some of the things they go through, and a lot of it is trust. And so, how do you have a relationship with trust when both parties are living very dangerous lives and don't necessarily trust one another? So that's one way that he's grown. He's grown with his just the connections that he's made. And he's a very different character than he was in book one.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to mention what's going on with Zoya in this book.
Yeah. So she is in this book. She's not in every one of the books, but she is in this one, plays a very strong role. She has been infiltrated into a private intelligence company based in Berlin. And she has been infiltrated into them to try and figure out what they're all about, because the work they're doing, they're ostensibly working for the Israeli government, but the Israeli government denies that they have anything to do with them. the American CIA has no idea. So they slipped Zoya in there to find out who she and who they are. But Zoya is also being pursued by her own nation. So Russian assassins get wind of the fact that she's in Berlin, and they make some mischief for Zoya while she's trying to do her job.
Yeah. So I find that so many of the writers who write in kind of this subgenre that you do are almost prescient at times. You have these ripped from the headlines events that are happening. So was there a real life spark to this book, or something that you drew from as inspiration?
Yeah, there were a few. The main one was I was just reading some dry, I don't even remember what it was. I was reading some publication about the intelligence community and found out that the United States has an agreement with the United Arab Emirates, which is Dubai and Abu Dhabi and other Muscat and other places, not Muscat, other places in the Middle East. And we have an agreement with them that we do not collect intelligence upon them. So we do not spy on the UAE. We set up their intelligence agency. We paid for it. They're our ally in the Middle East. So we say, look, we won't spy on you. And so as an author, especially a thriller author, you love the what if thing. And I'm like, what if that came back and bit us in the butt somehow? How would that happen? Roughly about the same time this was going on, America assassinated the head of Iranian foreign intelligence Quds Force, a guy named Soleimani. They assassinated him in Iraq. And I kind of thought, well, the UAE has very much a vested interest in combating Iran. They're actually fighting a war with Iran in Yemen. And I thought, well, what if the UAE was trying to draw the US into a war? So it kind of, that was the inception of it. But I also wanted it to kind of have a Cold War spy novel feel to it, take place in Berlin. There's more shifting alliances and intrigue and espionage, you know, just pure espionage in this book than in any of my other books. There's still all the action, but it is a kind of a noir like spy novel as well. So I kind of wanted all those elements put into one story.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just glancing at the comments. On my screen, all the comments from YouTube and Facebook come up right in front of me, so I can apply them to what we're talking about if I want to. And there is a lot of talk about Netflix, film, and TV stuff. So let's go ahead and address that. I have it to talk about later, but let's go ahead and do that since people are dropping Google links and things like that in the comments all about it. So you want to talk about your Hollywood news?
Yeah. So I found out last July that, well, you have to go back to 2009, about a month before The Gray Man was released, with the first book, The Gray Man, which came out in October of 2009. About a month before it came out, I optioned the film rights to a studio, New Regency. And a script was written. They got really close to shooting it, like in 2012, much to everybody's shock. Brad Pitt was on board for a while, and then that all fell through. And then later on, Sony, I optioned it with Sony. And at that point, the Russo brothers, who are the directors of a lot of the Marvel films, really great movies, Endgame and Infinity War and Captain America, Civil War and Winter Soldier and all those. They wanted to make the film, so they wrote a script for it. They had me come out to California for a few days, and we kind of talked about the character, and we talked about where it was going, because they had, you know, intentions of making it a franchise from the very beginning. And then it kind of languished at Sony for several years. And earlier this year, I heard that Ryan Gosling was interested in playing the lead, and the Russo brothers were back on board to direct. And it was not official. And you know, over 12 years, I've heard so many stories that have not come to pass. So I did not, you know, I don't even know if I mentioned it to people around me, because it was just another thing that I heard. But then I found out in July that they are actually making the film. And so they start March the 1st, and the hero, Court Gentry, is being played by Ryan Gosling. And the villain from The Gray Man is a guy named Lloyd, and he's being played by Chris Evans. And Ana de Armas is also in it, and there's several other really good actors in it. So they're about 2 weeks away from starting.
That's incredible. I mean, it's the fact that it's getting made, especially right now when so many things are on hold too, it's well deserved, but also like it must be so exciting to actually have that level of talent involved. Great.
It's Netflix's biggest budget ever. They're putting $200 million into it, so I'm really, really fortunate. I still feel like I'm on the outside. I'm friendly with the Russo brothers, and we've corresponded back and forth and asked questions and all that sort of stuff. But day to day, I won't really have anything to do with the film. My nose is deep into the next Gray Man book, and then I have another book to write after that. So it's this thing where I can't wait for it to come out, and I'm going to sit there and turn on my TV with my family and watch it just like everybody else. And I'm looking forward to it.
That's fantastic. And is it just that movie, or is there a deal for future series too?
Well, it is the intention of the Russo brothers and Netflix to continue the franchise do other books as well. This is just one film, so it's not a Netflix series. It's a kind of a 2-hour or whatever film, but they do want to do more from that.
That's fantastic. We just had someone ask, so it's actually based on like Gray Man. It's not an original screenplay. It's based on that novel.
Correct. It's based on the first book, and I read the screenplay that Joe Russo wrote a few years ago. He sent it to me as soon as he was done. I loved it. Of the 4 screenplays that have been written for the Gray Man that I'd read, it was the closest to the original story. Since then, several other writers have become involved. So, my philosophy about it is very different from a lot of the readers, because I see the readers on social media all the time saying you can't let them change anything. I mean, frankly, I'm not Stephen King and I'm not John Grisham, so I don't have the power, to tell them they can't change anything. And secondly, these are not engineers whose job it is to replicate what I wrote on the page. They are artists. The directors are creative people, and they're artists, and the actors are, and the cinematographer and the screenwriters, and they all are going to put their art on it. So I know it's going to be different from the original book, and that doesn't bother me in the least. I understand it's 2 different mediums. The books will always be there on the shelves at Murder by the Book, and you can always buy them and see that take on it. And it's just a different medium.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's important. We throughout the time I've been at the store, anytime some author gets a big movie deal or series, of course, readers feel this sense of ownership to the characters and their love of the series. And so everyone has a comment on everything. But I think you have the exact right approach. Like, that's how I would consider it. It's 2 different mediums. They're going to do what they need to do best for pacing, for, a visual medium, as opposed to us as readers bringing our imagination to the novel. Like, so things aren't going to be the same, but it's also such an amazing exposure for an author, to have so many more people meeting their character and then wanting to, hopefully pick up the books and see what else is out there. So it's great. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. Yeah, what I say is, like, there couldn't be a better advertisement for my book series than the film. So I'm on board. And I really, beyond that, I do trust the Russo brothers. They wrote an amazing script. Sitting there in Los Angeles talking to them about it, they got the character, and they got the fact this needs to be a hard-edged, gritty story. That's how it's written. And like they totally saw all that from the very beginning. So I know I'm in good hands in that regard.
Well, that's fantastic. So let's get back to your writing. So technology is always changing. Do you ever think I shouldn't put this in the book as like this new cutting edge technology because in 5 years it's going to seem dated? Or what's your theory on putting technology in books?
Yeah, but things are going to get dated no matter what you do. It's so tough. I have learned a lot since I first got published in 2009. Relentless is my 10th Gray Man book, but it's actually my 20th published novel. If you add all the Clancy books I did, Red Metal, and then I was actually the ghostwriter on a couple of books for another author. So this is my 20th book, and I've learned so much along the way. And I can think of a book a long time ago where the villain was Osama bin Laden, and then he was assassinated. While I was going through the edits, and I changed it to Anwar, to al-Awlaki, who was an American Al-Qaeda terrorist, and then he got killed before the book came out. And of course, I'm the only guy, in the West going like, damn. But it was obviously it was a good thing. So then you're like, okay, you can't really chase the news like that. You just have to, and it's the same with technology. If I marveled at the first iPhone in my first book in 2009, that would look a little bit boring to someone that picked the book up today. On the other hand, as I said, all these books are standalone, so you write them for the time that they're written in. And if there is a technology that is in the intelligence field or the military field or whatever book I'm writing, and it's interesting to me and it's something that people would use at that time, at that day, then I definitely do want to put it in there, because I want to, when I do my research and I come across something that's fascinating to me, I just, immediately want to just get everybody that reads my books into a room and tell them about it. I don't want to wait a year and make them read the book. It's like, I wish everybody was just looking over my shoulder when I found this stuff out. So I'm passionate about telling these things. And yes, 4 or 5 years later, it's going to be dated, but one book at a time.
That's fair enough. So as far as your research goes, do you have like a roster of experts you consult, or do you just Google? What is your favorite type of research?
I do have people, sort of subject matter experts that I reach out to, whether it be medical or, involving helicopters or involving the military or obviously involving intelligence, CIA and all that kind of stuff. Different subject matter experts in different countries, people that help me with the language, sometimes more accurately than others. I think one of my books just got a quick look through by somebody that I thought was really checking to make sure that I spoke a tiny bit of the language, so I did my best, and then they just came back with a thumbs up. And then as soon as the book came out, everyone that was a native speaker of that language was like, wow, this sounds like a guy that speaks a little of the language. But yeah, so there's a lot of people that I reach out to and talk to. You do the most that you can in the time that you have, and I write 2 books a year, so there's so many times where it's like I was invited to go speak at the Lithuanian embassy after I wrote a Tom Clancy book, and as fascinating as that was, I was like, everything that I know about Russian-Lithuanian relations was on the page of that book, and I'm glad that I look like an expert in my writing, but I'm a storyteller, and I'm just trying to tell the story as credibly as possible. So that's the research that you have to do.
Well, I would say also there's something to be said for the research and everything you find out that you want to include in the book, not getting in the way of the thriller and pacing aspect, because I'm sure you find all this great stuff, you deep dive into it, and then you have to pick and choose kernels that actually go into the book so that you have a good story.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely true. And that's another way that I've sort of matured as a writer over 20 books, because early on, if I did the research, I wanted it to be in the book. And fortunately, I've had a great editor from the beginning, Tom Colgan at Berkeley, and he would kind of weed out and say, you're going long with this, or this is, like too much detail or not relevant to the plot. And now I feel like I've finally been trained. I've been smacked down enough to where I don't put things in the story unless it pushes the plot forward. So yeah, I'll read a 180-page government manual about halo jumping, and then when I'm done with it, I'm like, it'd be cooler if that scene was told another point of view and they just saw the guy landing, and you've done all the work and you just like crap. But it's all about what makes the book better.
Yeah, absolutely. I always, when I read a debut novel, especially one that you can tell especially historical novels, where you can tell someone's really just found so much interest in the time period that they've been researching or that the book's about, you can tell on those debuts that, you just get to these chunks of like, here's an interesting story I came across in research, and it stands out. So it's interesting you say that you've also had to kind of adjust over the years, because I
think that the historical fiction would be even tougher, because you know that you're learning things that very few people know, or contemporary in contemporary times know, and you would want to really put that out there. And it's like, you write a whole chapter about how to churn butter or something, but if it doesn't push your historical fiction story along, then it shouldn't be in there.
If it doesn't serve the plot, absolutely. So I'm just going to pause for a second to say that we are getting some questions. If you have questions and you've joined us a little bit late, feel free to pop any questions in the comments. We'll get to them in a little bit. There's no such thing as a stupid question. We will ask them. And we did have someone wondering if personalized books are an option. Unfortunately, not for this one. Hopefully, when life resumes normalcy, Mark will be coming to Murder by the Book again, like he does for almost every book, and we will be able to have personalized copies at that point. But for today, we just have books and signed book plates. So let's see. Okay, so we just were talking about suspense and pacing. So what's your trick for keeping the book suspenseful? Do you have a page count per day and then you end with a cliffhanger, or what's your process?
Well, every time somebody says like, how do you do it? Or what's your process? I'm always like, well, do you have any ideas? Cause I'm always feeling like it's not the best process. I mean, truthfully, I have kind of a word count that I want to hit when I'm writing a book, and I'm always writing a book. And I'm always using free time to think about the next book I'm going to write. So I've written 2 books a year, just about every year since 2009. And so there's not a whole lot of like real downtime. But I just, I write, I've gotten very good at writing whatever part of the story I'm thinking about or I'm passionate about it right now. If I had to write from page 1 to page 520 in a sort of completely linearly, I don't know how to say it, fashion, I wouldn't be able to pull that off. I have to be able to be like, okay, well, that scene in the 3rd act where, this happens, it's like, I'm going to go write that today. And that helps you get the word count. And you kind of have to train your brain a little bit. And also, in addition to train your brain, you have to trust that at the end of the day, well, at the end of someday, maybe at the end of 6 months or whatever, you will have a complete story that once you edit it will work together. So I think the thing that keeps my stories exciting and propulsive or whatever is I feel like I'm just about always writing the scene that I'm passionate about at that moment. I was writing something today for the next Gray Man book, book 11, and it's something that probably happens 2/5 of the way through the story, and I haven't even introduced some of these characters that I'm writing scenes where they're involved, and I'm not introducing them now. I'll go back and do that later, in an earlier part of the book, but I'll do it later. So you do that, and then at some point you have to add all the connective tissue that makes all your passionate parts, connect together, and you have to do that in a way that is not just, this guy got on a bus and got off a bus. Every scene has to be told in some unique way. And I'm 10 books in, and I'm always trying to find new, interesting things to talk about and ways to execute it.
So do you want to give us a little preview of what's happening in that book?
Yeah, book 11. I can talk more about that than I can about Relentless. It's so funny. Once you turn that book in, you don't look at it again. And 6 months later, the book comes out, and you have this like mild panic attack before you start doing press for it, because you're like, oh wait, okay, who's in that? What country was that? And because you're so deep into the next thing and thinking about the thing beyond. So right now I'm writing book 11 in the series. It's called Sierra 6. Which was the code name of the hero, Court Gentry, when he was on a ground branch unit. And ground branch is a CIA paramilitary operations unit, so it's kind of like Delta Force or Navy SEALs, but for the CIA, they have a wider mission, I guess. And Court, way back in the past, I think I'm placing this 11 years in the past. Is joining this ground branch team, and while they're doing this, they encounter something in Pakistan, which they think they take care of in the past. But there's also a present plot line. It's a shifting story with 2 plot lines: present day and 11 years ago. In the present day, Court is freelancing again. He's not with the CIA, and he's doing a job in India. And it involves some things that he realizes he was involved in Pakistan 11 years before. So there's this kind of interweaving of these 2 plot lines that take place over a decade apart. And I think it's going to be an interesting story, taking place in mostly in India and some in Pakistan.
So it sounds great. Your process is boggling my mind though, because you're writing stories now in the past, in the present,
Yeah.
scene by scene. Do
Yeah.
you have like post-its all over the table of this scene's going to go here, or can you see how they're going to come together with that connective tissue as you're writing them?
Never as clearly as I would like. There is not this beautiful roadmap in my brain. I'd be so happy if there was. And I've said that forever. And I have friends that, whiteboard every scene and all this stuff. And I would love to do that. I've bought books on mind mapping, and I bought books on, plotting and all this other stuff, and never really got past about page 15, because it's like, hey, I got to go write this book. I can't learn how to write a book right now. So, but having said that, I do like a little bit of an outline just to get my head around things. And I just noticed back in early January, I was working on another book called Armored that we can talk about if we have time, that's coming out next year. It's not a Gray Man book. And I was doing this thing in my head, like, okay, I've got to start Gray Man 11 here pretty soon. And I realized I didn't know what it was about. So I just ground to a halt on Armored and spent a few weeks hashing out this sort of a synopsis. My synopsis looks like a very short, incomplete story. It's about, I think this one's 16 pages long, and it just basically tells what happens in the story, although the connective tissue is not there. But it's enough to get me going to my laptop and starting to write scenes, and it somehow comes together. I always say when my books are 95% finished, I don't think you could read them and know what was going on. It really has to be 100% finished, and then go through a couple rounds of editing before I don't hate it.
That's amazing. Well, clearly it works, because as you said, you're not just on book 10 here. You've written a ton of books since I first met you for Gray Man. So
yeah.
Your process clearly works. It's just fascinating to me what it actually is. So did you do this also for the Clancy books? Or did you have to turn those in, chapter by chapter?
No, I did the whole thing, and always, I have a great editor. Tom Colgan has edited 18 of the 20 books I've written in my life, and I had a great editor on the other 2 books that I was a ghost for. So I've been super, super fortunate. And with the Clancy books, it was a little more, they definitely wanted to know what you were going to write about. And my philosophy is like, I don't want to go off and work on something for 6 months and turn it into the editor and it wasn't what they wanted or what they were expecting. It's like, I want to have this conversation at the beginning. And Tom has always been great. I always feel like I solve my own problems while I'm talking to Tom, which means Tom is actually solving the problems. Like, I'll hang up the phone and be like, hey, I got that all figured out. And it's like, well, that's because I had that 2-hour call with Tom and we worked it out. My agent, Scott Miller, is the same thing. We just talked about Sierra 6 the other day, and he just tweaked what I'd come up with some ideas and some things to think about, and I just thought it was terrific. So it's good to have people help you along the way.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I don't know that this question actually applies given your process now, but I'm still going to ask it. Mm-hmm. When you're writing, do your characters ever do something unexpected, or kind of put the brakes on what you think that they're going to do?
Yeah, absolutely, all the time. They're in Relentless. There's a character who was going to be a straight up villain, and I don't want to give away too much. And as I was writing her, I wrote the first half of the book, and every nuance of her she was playing for the other team. She was a bad guy. And then I just had a scene which was already sort of planned, like in my head, where she's talking to her boss about some problems and some issues. And then in this conversation, these 2 people just having breakfast and having this sort of a disagreement about things, I just had her start to argue with him in this way that I was like, well, wait a second. She's starting to sound kind of sympathetic. And it's like, do I put the brakes on that and turn her, back into like an evil, mustache twisting villain, or do I see where this goes? And I wrote a few pages, and by the end of it, I'm like, okay, I have to go back and make her a more nuanced character and a little more gray in her, a little more ambiguous. And I think it made the story a lot better. At the end, there's plenty of villains in this story, so you're not going looking for people to root against. But this one character is someone that ultimately got caught up into something and kind of realizes, her morals kicked in maybe a little late, but they kicked in, and I think it made it a more interesting story.
That's fascinating. I've heard authors say that sometimes when they're writing and they have writer's block, or they just, it's not working out, that they're trying to force the character to do something that's not natural to the character, and they backtrack, and then the character they listen to what the character's telling them, and then it flows again. And it's such a kind of weird, magical, thing. But it sounds like, when you're writing, it can change. Like, the character can change what your plan is, and it's always amazing to me when people say that. But it's great.
I love when it happens.
Yeah. Okay, so we always have aspiring writers watching this. What's your number one tip for aspiring writers?
Finish something. So don't have 5 books that you're working on. Don't have plans for the sequel and the trilogy and the whatever is beyond that. Spend all your time on finishing something, and maybe it's not your work in progress. And you might have something that you're very passionate about that you've been working on a long time. I feel like all the advice I have to give comes from me doing it wrong. It doesn't come from me, having any magic wisdom or whatever. It took me 15 years to write my first book. And I immediately pushed it aside and wrote my second book in 7 months, because once I knew I could do it, then I was like, how much was I really working in those 15 years? But I was so stuck in that first book that I finally stepped away, probably 13 years into it or something, and I wrote a novella. Didn't try and publish it or anything, but that novella was 100 pages as opposed to whatever my book was. It was absurdly long. I knew nothing about how to write a book and get published or anything. I just started writing. But I wrote like a 100-page novella or 75-page novella, and it had a beginning and a middle and an end, and you went back through it, and then you edited it. You did all the things that you have to do to be a writer. And I got over all of the speed bumps and made a pretty good story. And after that, it gave me kind of the confidence. It's like, okay, all these speed bumps that I'm hitting writing this big novel, you can get over them all the time. So for me, I talk to a lot of people that have all these different plans. And to me, what that is telling me is they've written the easy part in a bunch of different stories. And then when they got to the roadblocks, they stopped, they bailed, and they went on to something else. It's not everybody's experience, but that was definitely what I was doing for a long, long time. But once I went and, if it was a short story or another novel or something like that, just getting through the entire, there's just a whole lot of chops you have to have. You have to have confidence, and you have to have humility. You have to have, creativity, and you have to have nose in the work, like the blue collar aspect to writing a book as well. So, if you complete something, then you're way ahead of the game.
That's a great tip. Especially since March, we've done, 150 or something of these events or more, and talked to literally hundreds of authors. You have one of our rare events tonight when it's just me having a conversation with you. Normally we have multiple authors. And so it's so fascinating because someone said at one point that you have to have enough ego to think that people would actually care about what you're writing. Like someone's actually going to want to read what I'm writing. But then on the other hand, little enough ego to know that what you're writing is crap and that you need to revise it. So, it's a fine balance.
It's an absolute balance. It really is. But I tell people that are writing, it's like every time you do, solve a problem and get through it or whatever, you've just left 1,000 other wannabe writers in the dust. And you keep plugging away and you keep doing it. But the main thing is like you have to love doing it and take a half a step back and say, okay, do I like to do it? If you like to do it, then you're going to do it. And it's not about getting published or whatever. And the publishing will come. I had an epiphany in my life where I just realized, it's like I'm not published and I'm just like 40 years old and I thought I should be published by then and all this other stuff. And I just realized I like writing books and I like thinking about this stuff, and that's where my mind wants to be when I'm out walking my dog or whatever. And I just relaxed a little bit, and I got published a couple years later. So it'll come to you if it's something that you like.
Great. So you sit down to write. Do you have a favorite beverage? Do you put some music on? Do you have any little weird routine that you follow when it's time to write?
I like to write first thing in the morning, and it's just coffee and me. And I just open the laptop and start and the only beverage is coffee. It's like you hear about all these like tortured authors that drink, scotch and write all night. It's like I'd probably just fall asleep or close my laptop. It would not lead itself to good writing. I love for the longest time I would write at Starbucks. I would never write at home. Obviously, in the last year, that's changed. But I even when I travel, I love to like just go to a coffee shop in a hotel or in the neighborhood and write there. As far as music, I put headphones on and listen to rain. It's just white noise. For some reason I like sort of being out in the mix of public with things happening around me and ignoring them to some degree. And somehow it helps me focus. It's like everything going on around you that you're not part of, and the kind of the white noise, it really does help me focus.
Yeah, I love when I travel, and I do the same thing with white noise. If I'm going to try to read, because if I hear clips of conversations, I'm drawn out. But if I, and I personally can't listen to music while reading. I can't have background, especially anything with the lyrics. So white noise is my friend as well. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about reading, and then I'm gonna open it up to the audience questions. Actually, I have 2 more questions. So here's the 3-part reading question. I'll happily repeat any part of it again. So who are some of your writing influences? Who are some of your favorite authors? Meaning, like, I don't miss a book by this person. And then, have you read and loved anything recently that you want to recommend?
Yeah. Okay, I'm bad with 3-part questions. Oh, the first one was like,
no,
I got it. I've got it. I'm going to prove that I've got this. Influences. Yeah. So Tom Clancy, I have to say it, but I have to say it because it's true. The very first thriller I ever bought in my life was Patriot Games. It was a Clancy novel, and then I was just blown away. So I read his other stuff, and then I was like, who else is like him? So Frederick Forsyth, Nelson DeMille, Gerald Seymour, Jean Le Carré, of course. I've read everything that they wrote, and Frederick Forsyth is still alive. And if he puts another book out, I'll be the first guy there to buy that. Okay, I remember the part 3. What was part 2?
Part 2 is, who are some of your favorite authors? Presumably living ones.
Right. Well, I mean, in the last 10 years, like one of my favorite series was the Red Sparrow series by Jason Matthews. I just love it. I don't know him personally, never spoken to him or anything. I just thought it was just so incredibly well done. The movie, if you've only read the movie Red Sparrow, you're missing out. It wasn't bad, but I mean the writing is just really, really fantastic. I'm also a huge Don Winslow fan. Power of the Dog is one of my favorite books ever, but there's so many others. There's an author named Ralph Peters who doesn't get the attention that he deserves, and he's one of my favorite authors as well. And then as far as something new that's really good, Nick Petrie's new book, The Breaker, is fantastic. It's really good. I mean, I think it's coming out very soon.
No, it's out. It just came out.
It's out. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're gonna have him. It's funny, we had a talk with him and Don Bentley in conversation. Don interviewed him a couple weeks ago, and they're reversing for Don's new book. So Nick will be doing an interview of Don. I had it in my opening thing, wherever March 5th. But great. We're a big fan of that series, the Drifter series.
Yeah, Nick is great. Don's first book was fantastic. I have his second book right here on my desk. I just haven't opened it because I'm still finishing Nick's book. But those are can't miss authors who are new and really good.
Excellent. I said I was going to open it up, but I have one more question. So you have written, obviously, in Tom Clancy's world. If you could pick another writer's world to play around in, not publishing contract wise, just having fun, who would that be?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so when Vince Flynn passed away, very sadly, I had never met Vince. We were roughly the same age, and he was a couple years older than me, and I'd only had a few books out. But I was already working in the Tom Clancy world, and I remember my agent asked me, he said, they're going to be looking for somebody to continue the series. Are you interested? And I said, no, I really, really liked Vince Flynn, but I didn't know it like I knew the Clancy stuff.
Yeah.
And I was intimidated as hell to work in the Clancy world. And I knew those characters back, front, left, and right, and what they might say and how they might say it, or at least I felt I did. And Vince Flynn, I didn't have that depth of knowledge. So as far as, this is going to sound like a cop-out answer, but I would love to write another Tom Clancy novel someday. I didn't walk away from it because I didn't want to do it anymore. I walked away from it because I'd done 7 and 6 years, and I was terrified of it not staying fresh and getting repetitive and redundant. They're huge books. I had other things I wanted to do, but at the time I said, I'm stepping off this fast-moving train, and someday I'm going to want to get back on the train, but it's not going to be here at the station anymore. So, but honestly, truthfully, the Clancy stuff means so much to me. Even before I was writing it, just reading it, my father and I would give each other the Clancy books for Christmas every year. And he passed away before I ever got published or an agent or finished a book. So, the Clancy stuff just means a ton to me. And I would love another crack at a Clancy book somewhere down the road.
I'm sure at that point they would be happy to have you do it. I've talked to Ace Atkins about this too, and I think that one of the tricks, he writes the Robert B. Parker Spencer books, and feels you can hear talking with him that he feels the same way about that world that you do with Clancy. He loves Spencer, and it's been such a good fit for him to write those books because of the respect he has for that world and the in-depth knowledge and desire to do that world proud. And I think that the reason that he's done so well with that as a choice, and you with Clancy, obviously people love what you've done with the Clancy books, is just that good fit, that respect. So I'm sure everyone would love to see you write another Clancy book in the future. Let's see here. We have some questions. I'm just scrolling through the comments to find the questions. And there was lots about the movie at the beginning. So, sorry, almost there. Okay, here's the first one. What is your involvement in the audiobooks? Kathy was wondering, do you choose the narrators?
I chose my narrator, Jay Snyder, who's done all the Gray Man books, and he does a great job. And I want to, brag about how I chose him, but I was only given 2 choices, and actually the other guy was great too. So it was basically a coin toss. But Jay Snyder, who writes the audiobooks, who reads the audiobooks, is fantastic. And every year people send me emails. And they're like, is Jay doing this one? Is Jay doing this one? And I'm like, as long as he wants to do them, I can't make him, but as long as he wants to do them, he's going to be the voice of the Gray Man. I hear his voice when I'm when I'm writing dialogue, or I hear Jay Snyder's voice as a Gray Man. I will say, in the audio world and also in the publishing world, I have another book. I wrote a scripted audio, like an audio play for Audible called Armored, which they're actually recording next month, and they have like close to 40 actors and original score and sound effects and all this stuff, and it'll come out later in the year. But I also have a 2-book deal to take those characters and write novels about them. So next year sometime I should have a book out called Armored, and fortunately Sony has picked up the option for that as well, with Michael Bay to direct and Erwin Stoff to produce. So it's another kind of thing I have in Hollywood, which may mean in 15 years that that'll get made. I don't know, but so my work in the audio world has gotten a little bit more varied with this new project.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that and like kind of plot?
Yeah. So Armored is a story of a guy named Josh Duffy, who's a civilian contractor, like a military contractor, who takes a job with the world's worst private military corporation in Mexico, and he has to work in a motorcade that has to travel through cartel country up on the devil's spine of the Sierra Madres, to go meet with some cartel leaders with the United Nations. And they are double crossed and triple crossed, and there's threats within. And it's a little bit like Apocalypse Now, a little bit like Black Hawk Down, and it's a little bit like Fast and Furious, to be honest with you. It's all action. But yeah, that's going to be a book, and the lead character Josh, his wife Nicole, is very much a part of the story as well. Real badass female character. And so Josh and Nicole, I will write a second book about them, at least two books about them.
Awesome. So that book filled the spot for when you would have been writing a Clancy. So you're still doing 2 a year.
Yeah, I'm still doing 2 a year. I've got another red metal we're going to do once we research. So it's I keep saying I'm going to get off this hamster wheel, but I keep there's books that I want to write. So what else do I have to do? I'm going to keep writing.
Well, lucky us. There's always something to read. Then that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so Kathy had a specific question here. Do you think that facial recognition is going to get even harder to defeat as technology improves?
Absolutely. It is. I mean, they can do so much with gait analysis now. They have algorithms to where you could totally change your face with plastic surgery, and they can still pick you out because of the way that you walk. It's not as good as the facial recognition stuff. And honestly, even with masks, that doesn't really do that much because most of it is peritoneal. No, I forgot the term, but it's this area right here around the eyes where the algorithms focus. And obviously sunglasses can, mess things up to some degree, but there's places where you're walking around with sunglasses, you're kind of like flagging yourself as trouble. But facial recognition is one thing, and also biometric coding. Your passport now has your biometric data in it, so which just makes it really hard for a spy to go to the same country twice under two different, passports. It's basically human intelligence has just gotten orders of magnitude more difficult as computers have gotten more and more advanced.
Wow. Okay, Deb would love to see Red Metal as a mini-series. Any chance?
Well, I'm definitely writing book 2 with my co-author Rip Rawlings. I won't say we're on hold because he and I are both working on other books and we're planning on it, but we were going to start in the fall working on it, and hopefully we still will. It's a book, the first book, Red Metal, we went to Poland and to Germany and into France and military bases in the US and DC. And it's a type of a story that needs a lot of physical location research. And Red Metal 2 takes place in Asia. So we'll need to go to Japan and Taiwan and maybe the Philippines or Indonesia. And we will need to do that together, and when it's safe to do so. Although I think I live in Tennessee. You're probably safer in Japan than you are in Tennessee, and they probably just won't let a guy from Tennessee into Japan. So hopefully that will, that will pass, and then we'll work on Red Metal 2. They probably mentioned miniseries just because it is a big story with a lot of characters and a big novel, and I would love to see that someday. But no, Hollywood hasn't bid on that one.
I think you're doing all right with Hollywood for now. All right. So, do you ever wake up and the creative juices just aren't there? Do you push through it or write that day off?
Yes, that happens all the time, and people should know that happens to all authors, even if they've had some success, and even if the books keep coming out. It happens all the time, and there are days where I will sit at a laptop for 4 hours and have written negative words. Like I have fewer words when I'm done than when I started. It's like, how did that happen? And then there's days where you like, I have 30 minutes between a doctor's appointment and, carpool or something. And I'll have a laptop on my knees in my car and I'll bang out 1,000 words. But my philosophy, I don't write it off for the day, because I tell myself, and I think it's true, that every hour I'm sitting there working on my book, the book is going to be better. So if the creative juices aren't there, you can go back and edit. You can just go back and read something that you read before. there's something you can do that'll make your story better. I get very fixated with word count, way too fixated. Like I need to write 1,500 words a day to get this book done on time. And if you get too fixated on it, then you just start writing crap just to get it done.
Yeah.
It's just better to work and as diligently as possible in whatever way you can. And every hour you spend working on your book is better off for it.
Great. How do you pick locations?
Different ways. And to be perfectly honest, I've picked locations just because I wanted to go there, which I guess maybe other authors do too. But absolute truth that book 4 in the Gray Man series, Deadeye, takes place in Sweden because I'd just seen the girl with the dragon tattoo and I thought it looked really, really cool. And I wanted an excuse to go there. So I went to Estonia and Sweden and Denmark and Germany and Belgium in the wintertime, big blizzard in Stockholm. And it was the coolest of all the research trips I've done for Gray Man books, but I just wanted to go there. There's places I wanted to go where I won't do a Gray Man book. Like, I go to the Bahamas every year to go scuba diving, and I don't see a big international. I mean, you could do a lot of cool stuff with the Bahamas. There's nothing against the Bahamas, but like the locations have been like, next year's book, I'm going, if I can go, I'm going to Mumbai. And, I want to do something in Japan. I kind of have some big ideas about locations like that.
Yeah. Okay, so this is a big thing, but essentially, how was the process of writing Gray Man as a debut, and how did you navigate the unknown of the industry?
Well, that's a great question. I had met an agent in 2006 because I'd given him something at a writers conference in San Diego. And he read it. It was like 20 pages or 10 pages or whatever. And he's like, "This is really good writing. Tell me more about the book," because I didn't know to write a synopsis or an outline or anything. So I just kind of talked to him, like a little speed dating thing about the book. And his eyes kind of glazed over. And he went from thinking I was a great writer to like, yeah, that story is not really going to sell. But he's like, you're a great writer. If you wrote something else, I'd love to see it. So suddenly I'd met an agent and who was interested in my work. So I went and spent a year or so writing a book. And if Joshua is in this place in his career, he's going to be like, "God, I don't want to do it like this guy did it." Because I did. I spent a year writing the book, and then I gave it to the agent. He came back and he's like, I'm not going to rep that book. He's like, "But I really like the hero, this guy called the Gray Man, and I love this subplot." So I wrote a whole nother book for him. And that's what he said, "I'm going to take that out to publishing houses." So I found him as an agent just by looking up who is the agent of my favorite author. And you can do that online. The internet is a wonderful place for some things. And I was a big fan of this guy, Ralph Peters. And I thought, whoever's representing that guy, that's who I want to go to. And so he was my first choice of an agent. And he's still my agent today and will be, my agent as long as I'm writing. So I didn't really know how to navigate the industry or anything like that. I just worked on writing a book and then finding somebody who would represent me. And that was all I did.
It seems like consistently the best piece of advice I hear with regards to that is write the book that you want to write, because if something never happens with it, you've still written something that you wanted to write, and then go from there.
Yeah. And the other thing I would say about that is even if that book doesn't get published, you're so much better an author than you were when you started that book. My fourth book got published, and my first book that I spent 15 years on, I'm so glad I spent those 15 years writing that book, because it made me a better author for book 2 and book 3 and book 4. So there's no such thing as wasted time if you like to do it and you want to do it.
So is that book forever in a drawer somewhere, never to see the light of day?
Well, I'm proud of the story, but the problem with it is like I've taken all the cool parts out and used it in my other 20 books, So I say it's like the car that's in your backyard and up on blocks with all the parts taken out of it. So the actual idea of the story is still viable, but I'd have to come up with 35 new action scenes or something.
You've cannibalized it.
I've totally cannibalized it, exactly.
That's funny. Okay, another very specific question. Is the character Lloyd still going to be Lloyd from Legal, or is he a field operative in the movie?
I don't know. The script that I read, Lloyd was a beefed up character from how I wrote him. I don't know. I haven't read the shooting script for the new film, so I really don't know what. It's a good question. I don't know what they're going to do. He's a villain in my book, and he's a villain in this one. Some of the talk about the story makes it sound like he might be kind of an operations person as opposed to a lawyer for the CIA, which is what he was in Gray Man. So they might change him significantly. I honestly don't know.
All right. So compare Jack Ryan Jr. favorite traits of his compared to Court.
So I see Court as grittier, tougher, more world-wise. Jack Ryan Jr. Now I started with him pretty early and did 7 books, so he changed throughout those books. He was the young man on the totem pole at Henley and Associates, which was the campus, which was the unit that he worked for, and I was always sort of like, having to kind of explain away the fact he was the president's son and was working as an operative. But I felt like I pulled that off as well as one can. And if people mentioned it, you'd be like, yeah, well, that's the book. That's what you're gonna do. But Jack Ryan Jr. started kind of green and fresh and got more seasoned as he went along. I would say IQ is higher than Court Gentry's. He is a finance guy, and he approaches things from an analytical standpoint initially, even though obviously he gets into the action. Whereas Court is, he was early in his career a door kicker or a trigger puller or a knuckle dragger or whatever you want to call, sled dog, whatever pejorative you want to give to somebody who is, kind of all brawn. But he, just like other guys that do that for a living, there's a lot more than meets the eye, and there's a lot of it. He's in Ground Branch, a CIA unit called Ground Branch, and those are very intelligent people that also have the physical prowess. So they're two different guys. I never had trouble switching back and forth between the two of them. I saw Jack Jr. as one person, and I saw Court Gentry as another. So it was actually a pretty easy transition to go back and forth between those books.
Perfect. All right. So I think this is going to be our last crowd question. It just popped up here in the nick of time. Are you still getting out shooting and doing tactical work? How's it going?
Yeah, I'm shooting. The price of ammunition has gone through the roof, and so has the price of firearms. Although I did just buy a firearm. I bought an Evo Scorpion Micro, which is a small, like 9mm subgun. I'm actually in the early process of putting my own private gun range together on some family property, and it might be the fall or something before I'm actually out there. I've been out there shooting. There's not a gun range there now, so I am going to get more serious with it and do more long range stuff. I have 2 safes full of guns right now, and I mean, literally the price of ammo, I realized I had to start locking up you should always lock up your ammo, but I started that became as valuable as gold, just the way the guns and ammunition are these days. So I don't shoot as much as I'd like, just because I'm working a lot and it's an hour drive to where I shoot. And then COVID, there's like local ranges that I just haven't been to that much, but I'm definitely getting back into it for sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, I think that's going to be our discussion for tonight. Obviously, that I'm a big fan of this series. We've loved hand selling it for years. I'm so excited, and it's been so fun to watch your career just get more and more and more impressive, and all the opportunities come your way. For those of you who are interested, like I said, we have signed book plates for Relentless, hopefully for the next book, whether it's Armorer or whether it's another Gray Man, we'll be able to see you in store. Yeah. And thank you all for watching, and thank you so much, Mark. It's been a pleasure talking with you tonight.
Thanks, McKenna, and thanks everybody for tuning in. I really appreciate it.
All right, here's hoping that you are warm and safe there in Tennessee, and that snowstorm goes away soon.
Yeah, you guys too, for sure.
Yeah. All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.